Whoa, I'm getting a lot of emojis. I don't know where they're coming from. Um, it's the future. So this is like a more of probably like a practical question rather than theory. Um, she wants to know how often you should change your strings, and how do you know which kind of strings to buy?
That's great. That's a really good question. So it depends on whether you're playing acoustic or electric. There's also the ideal and the real. So pre what's been going on, I was a gigging musician. I played a lot, and if I was playing all the time, when I was so busy, that was actually when I needed to change my strings the most, when you had the least time to do it. I would say if you play 3 hours a week or so, you should
Okay,
probably change your strings every month for an electric guitar. For an acoustic guitar, depending on the kind of strings you have, they might have more longevity. So there are certain brands that, like the focus of their strings is that they last for a long time because it's a pain in the neck to change your strings.
like the coated
Um,
strings.
the coated strings. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say brands here.
Yeah, man, go for it.
Okay, great. So people talk about like elixir strings for that that are coated. I don't want to throw shade on elixir. They're great, but it's just not my thing sound wise. So I prefer to just change my strings more often,
Gotcha.
but I'm also not picky about the kind of string that I use. I just want them to be kind of fresh, and a lot of people like that sound of fresh strings because
Gotcha.
that's when you're going to have the most dynamism out of the strings. They're going to give you the most impact, and they'll respond to what you're playing. One thing that I would say is, if you're changing your strings, it's important to know what gauge string was on your guitar before you change your strings. Okay, and this is super important. It just helps you to, um, you know, make sure you conserve your guitars a little bit because let's say that you have light gauge strings. So like on an acoustic, let's say 11 gauge strings, right? And then you try to replace them with medium gauge strings, not even heavy gauge strings, but medium gauge strings. It's
Uh-huh.
going to put a lot of added pressure on the neck of your guitar, and it might actually do some damage to your guitar. So it's important that when you change your strings, you have a decent understanding of the gauge, right?
And
Um,
gauges, that's thickness, right?
that's
Basically.
thickness, exactly.
So a
Because they
heavier
come in
gauge.
all different. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Oh
Sorry.
no, no, you go.
I was just going to say that they come in all different gauges. And as you get more adept at the guitar, you choose the gauge for the kind of music you like to play and the kind of effect you want to get. I'd say typically most electric guitar strings are 9 is going to be the high E is going to be 9 gauge 9, right, and the low E is going to be a 42. And if you buy just a random guitar at a store, generally that's going to be that. If you go up to the next level in terms of size and you get like 10 on the high string, right, it's not going to do so much damage to your guitar. I mean, you'll be fine, and that's a little difference. But let's say that if you do the heaviest gauge on your guitar and it's an electric guitar, that could put a lot of pressure on the neck. For an acoustic guitar, medium gauge tends to be the standard. So I would say buy a medium gauge if you have any doubt as to the gauge of your strings. When you need to replace your strings, just buy a medium and you should be in good shape. And you could always take your guitar to a person who really knows what they're doing. Either if you have a teacher at home, or if you have your local guitar shop, they can kind of figure it out. I would say it's better to do that than to warp the neck of your guitars, because when I was a beginner, I actually had a few guitars that I was like, I'm getting better and I want to play on thicker gauge strings because that's what Stevie Ray Vaughan did, and I want to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan, right?
Mm.
And I tried to change the strings and did these very heavy strings, and it was to the detriment of my instrument. And then I had to put some money into making the neck not warped and all that kind of thing. So just
Talk
be
talk to me
careful.
about. I'm gonna throw you because you are a man of education. Talk to me about the. Although I think this is outside of your specialty, the physics of gauge and tone Like it has to do with the density of the string, right? And that is what affects the. And then
Oof.
there's tension involved in it. And do you know
Oh
anything
no,
about that?
I'm so right brain, Chris. You're the
Let me flip
left
it.
brain
Let me
here.
flip
You
it.
gotta help me. That's a
Let me
bad
flip
question for me.
Let me flip it and make it practical. Okay.
Thank you.
So why would you use lighter gauge or heavier gauge strings? Like one of them is
Oh,
easier to play. One of them, what are the differences between lighter gauge or heavier gauge?
okay, great. So lighter gauge strings are easier to play. If you're into playing like really virtuosically on an electric guitar and you have light gauge strings, it allows you to move faster along the fretboard. If you're playing in also a virtuosic style, but like a sort of blues virtuosic style in electric guitar, the thicker gauge strings have a little bit more resonance. So like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan and all those guys who played blues on a Stratocaster, they used like really thick gauge strings and to get that sound.
So does that mean it would sustain longer with the heavier gauge strings?
I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of split the difference. I use these strings that are called hybrid slinky. So the strings on the bottom are like a medium gauge,
Sure.
and the strings on the top are heavy gauge.
Gotcha.
Yeah, or excuse me, the
That's
strings on the bottom are heavy gauge strings on the top. I mean, from where the guitar is facing you. So these strings are thin, and
Yeah.
these strings are thick
Slinky,
on my
like,
electric.
the Ernie Ball brand.
Exactly. But now they have different types of slinkies. So they have, super slinky is the one that most people have, and then there's hybrid slinky, which is what I use.
I gotcha. Okay. I'm gonna do one more Maria question, and then my sister is trolling me in the comments. I have a question for her.